Good afternoon, everyone. Top of the hour here. We appreciate you attending today's Thursday Learning Series. And we're just going to do some brief introductions here and pass on control to our guest speaker. Chelsea, if you want to make the slides big for us. So we appreciate any of your questions. We see that they're coming in already, so give us a second to get introduced here, and then we will do questions at the end of the session. And if you have any questions, please go to the GoToWebinar box and enter in your questions. Recordings will be posted at the end of this event. Sorry there. And I'd like to, without further ado, welcome Sarah Smith. Sarah is the Social Listening Specialist for the FEMA Office of External Affairs. Sarah has been with FEMA for 3 years and building social listening programs using strategy and analysis to maximize the amount of relevant and actionable information. And I think we all agree that determining actionable information from social media is often difficult. Sarah Smith, like I said, is a social listening specialist. She's been, prior to FEMA, she has led the Division of Fusion in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response and the Department of Health and Human Services. And so without further ado, Sarah, I am going to turn it over to you and your presentation for this webinar.
Thank you, Eric. I'm going to go ahead and show my screen. Hopefully everyone can see the slides.
Yep, the slides look good, and we
Great.
can see your full screen. Thank you.
So I want to thank IAEM for having me. I'm very excited to share with you a little bit today about how we use social listening to map survivors' online experience during disasters. Before we get into the actual product of the Survivor Experience Map, I want to give a little bit of background on our social listening program here at FEMA. So at FEMA, we define social listening as the act of searching open source conversations for discussions of certain events or topics to better understand public sentiment, reaction, and needs. And we use a variety of strategies and tools to carry this out. Our actual social listening program here has grown a lot over the past 6 years or so. It began basically in 2011 during first a series of major tornado outbreaks followed by the Joplin tornadoes. And we initially used social listening for just operational information, trying to get an understanding of how bad damage was on the ground and get an understanding of what was happening right there on the ground. During 2012, during Hurricane Sandy, things expanded a little bit, and we began to use social listening more for public information needs. So specifically, social listening became a really critical tool for us to catch rumors and misinformation early, which allowed us to better combat those issues with better messaging. This was also the first time we started to incorporate a large team of people to do listening. So during Sandy, when the volume of conversation was greatest, we had a team of about 10 people distributed across field offices and regional offices, all working on doing social listening to have a better understanding of what people were saying and how they were doing. By 2013, because of all of the work we had done in Sandy and other disasters, we'd really proven the efficacy of social listening to an extent that our leadership was ready to make more of a financial investment in it, which is when we started to use paid tools to help increase our ability to analyze and quantify conversations. And this was also the first year that the Social Listening Specialist Program was created, and so we had an entire position dedicated to the concept of social listening. Since then, we've really begun to dedicate a lot of our time to cross-training and education within the agency. Our entire digital team here is cross-trained to do social listening so that anyone who's on call within our team can do social listening and write a social listening report. During disasters, our entire digital team is basically called upon to do social listening and contribute to those reports and be a part of that process. And it's really hard to educate other divisions and other programs within FEMA to have a better understanding of what information you can get from social listening and how social media can be useful to their programs as well. We feel that it's really important that we approach social listening strategically and focus our efforts. And one of the ways we do this is by ensuring that we have strongly established information requirements. We divide those into public perception issues and operational issues. On the left side, you can see the public perception information requirements that we focus on, which cover things like discussion of FEMA's role in the response, the overall tone or emotional state of the public, impact on relationships with external partnerships, and something I've already discussed, which is rumors or misinformation. And then on the operational side, we have things like socioeconomic impacts, real-time weather reports, resource shortfalls, and critical infrastructure issues. So why bother doing this? When people ask me what I do and what my job is, I tell people I give survivors a voice within our agency. The whole point of doing social listening is to let people know what the needs and concerns are of survivors and be a voice for those survivors and for those stakeholders on the ground during a disaster. It also helps us with those rumors and misinformation and ultimately allows us to better communicate and better meet those needs and concerns by improving our communications in the long run. So some examples of our listening and messaging coming full circle are right here. The application process for FEMA assistance can be really confusing and frustrating, which I know is a shock to a lot of people. But during the 2015 South Carolina floods, we found that a lot of survivors were having trouble understanding the decision letters that they were getting following their applications. And a lot of them were giving up at that point in the process, and they were sharing these frustrations on social media. And so we took this information and developed a series of graphics that tried to more clearly explain what options survivors have and encouraging them not to give up on the process. So we pushed this hard across all of our social channels, and we began to see a decrease in questions and comments expressing confusion about this overall process. A more recent example is during the Oroville Dam evacuation. We saw a real increase in anxiety over whether or not there would be a second round of evacuations. People were really taken off guard by that first evacuation and felt unprepared. And we responded to this information by putting out messaging about how to prepare a go bag so that people in the area would feel empowered with the right information to make what's a pretty difficult process a little bit easier. So if you're not familiar with the concept of an experience or journey map, these are visual representations of the overall story or process from an individual's perspective, exhibiting the relationships the individual has with an organization, service, product, or brand, and it shows it over the course of time and often across multiple channels. A lot of times these are used in private sector to help identify pain points in the customer experience. So for example, you might map the process of purchasing a cable TV package to figure out where in the process people get most confused or frustrated or perhaps give up altogether. In the federal government, we were most inspired by the VA's use of the experience map to show the way that veterans interact with the VA to seek information and apply for assistance. So the image that you see here is just a small section of the VA's customer journey map, which is actually a really, really large journey map that shows everything from just beginning to research information about VA services to following all the way through and receiving actual aid at the end of it all. So I've talked a little bit about how we use social listening in real time with our message, and I want to talk about using it more for long-term growth and improvement. We realized we were sitting on a ton of information and data from years and years of social listening, and the idea of a survivor online experience map came from the need to document, share, and incorporate all of this information that we've learned from already. And our hope was that at the end of the process, we'd be able to better understand what to expect, allowing us to become more proactive than reactive. And we also hope that this product would help us continue to educate within the agency, not just about social listening, but our overall digital strategy and what drives it. So building this product took a team of people with various expertise. First, we wanted to tap the people on our team with the most practical experience with social listening during disasters. That included myself and also our training and capacity building lead, who prior to coming to FEMA spent 4 years developing and leading the social listening program at American Red Cross. Next, we needed someone with UX and design experience to help guide the flow of information and help us figure out visually how we can lay things out to show what came next and how things connected. And finally, we needed someone who closely understood our own messaging and strategies to help us identify correlations or opportunities, which is where our social media content person came in. Our overall process actually began as a white paper focused on background research to look at listening done during past disasters and look for trends. And this was done qualitatively and quantitatively by looking at past listening reports, volume data from past disasters, and doing a literary review of existing research. And as I was pulling this white paper together, it quickly became clear that this information would be better conveyed and reach a larger audience if it was turned into a visual, which is when I began recruiting other members of our team to work on the project and turn it into something larger. So we began with a skeleton that came from the white paper, and then we began to build the meat of the product. And this happened through about three-hour brainstorming sessions in which we began to document all of our observations across an entire wall. And you can see that process being played out here in this picture with our graphic designer playing the role of mapping it all out, physically mapping it all out for us. So you can see that the final process of the brainstorming session was literally all handwritten, and then our graphic designer was really instrumental in taking that and turning it into something visually compelling and something that was easy to follow and draw conclusions from. And this is our final product, and I don't expect you to be able to read all of this unless you have pretty amazing eyesight, which is why under the handout section, just under the questions tab, you'll see that there's a PDF, and you can download that and have your own copy to spend some time with and look through, because this is a product that you're meant to spend time with, and kind of every time you look at it, you might learn something else or come up with a new observation. It's something that you're meant to take in bit by bit. I don't think that you're ever going to take it in all at once. So please do go ahead and download that and take it with you and feel free to look at it and draw your own conclusions from it. So the first thing we did when we started this project was establish the different time periods that we'd be focusing on. And we broke the conversation into 7 key stages. And at first, we just wanted to focus on the sequence itself. And once we filled in the process and actions that survivors were going through for each stage, we went back and named the stages based on that information. And the specific length of these time periods is, of course, going to vary to a certain degree with each disaster because all disasters are unique. But what's important is having an understanding of that sequence and an understanding of what's coming next and how things are going to start to shift and flow. So I wanted to share with you just 3 major takeaways. As I said before, every time you look at this, you might be able to come away with a little bit more information. And I didn't want to spend a ton of time going through every single stage and every single takeaway from each stage. So I just wanted to give some 3 high-level takeaways. The first is going to be the role of sentiment. The next is going to be an understanding of volume. And the third will be messaging opportunities. We spent a lot of time focused on public sentiment. The emotions ultimately included in each stage are not comprehensive. Disasters are going to impact each survivor differently, and there's no way that we could encompass every emotion felt by every individual. Instead, we started by brainstorming as many emotions that we've encountered from survivors during each stage that we've encountered online by survivors, and then went through and ranked each one based on qualitative data. And I want to note that while we do have access to tools that can automatically do sentiment analysis, we chose not to utilize them because we don't feel like they do a good job assessing sentiment during disaster conversations because so many words can inadvertently be categorized as negative when in fact they may be neutral. So we did a lot of our own categorization during this process. So the size of the emoji in each stage corresponds to the dominant emotions being expressed online during that stage. And by mapping them out this way, we can better understand not only the frame of mind of the survivors, but where they may be heading. And this is particularly important for our messaging. A person's emotional health can impact the way they process information and receive information. So we could put out the exact same information at 2 different stages and receive 2 different public reactions. So as a result, we spend a lot of time trying to make sure our messaging is sensitive to the feelings of the community at that specific time, and we constantly try to adjust accordingly. Better understanding the way the volume of conversation fluctuates was important to us, not just to know when public discussion is waning, but also from a staffing perspective. So as I said earlier, we cross-train our entire digital team to do social listening. And when there's a disaster, we form an entire listening team dedicated to searching for the information requirements that we discussed earlier as well. So the number of people dedicated to this team is entirely dependent on the volume of conversation. So a better understanding of the volume of conversation allows us to build better staffing plans and utilize our resources more efficiently. However, the volume section we found is imperfect. So these are volume graphs of the FEMA conversation during 4 major events over the past 12 months. The Louisiana floods and inauguration weekend tornadoes both really closely mirror the timeline pretty closely. However, we found that Hurricane Matthew in particular did not follow nearly as closely. A lot of this was due to traditional media coverage. Hurricane Matthew conversation actually peaked before the storm even began to come ashore. And this was primarily because the storm briefly became a Category 4 on October 6th which caused a massive spike in traditional media coverage. It led all of the media outlets during that day. When the storm actually began impacting parts of the Southeast, traditional media was actually overtaken by a breaking story about the presidential campaign. And so there was actually a drop in the volume. So the role that traditional media plays in the volume of conversation is pretty critical and varies a disaster. And so if we did a second iteration of this, it's something that we would want to take into account when we did the volume section. And we also might want to consider how different disasters vary with volume as well. As we mapped this out, we spent a lot of time focusing on the information void time period. This is a really critical time period with a lot of unknowns for both survivors and responders, I think. Because we know this time period is coming, we can begin to develop a lot of strategies to ease the frustration that's felt during this time. First and foremost, we have to acknowledge that there are still unknowns. We want to be as transparent as possible about both what we know and what we're still working on. As part of this effort, we're working to increase our direct replies to survivors on social media to show them that their concerns are being heard and that someone's working to address them. And we're finding that just that one-on-one response and engagement is helping them feel like they're being heard and helping them feel like someone's really working to help them. Second, we want to start literally filling that information void by providing a centralized location for information. So during Hurricane Matthew, we anticipated this need and built out a Hurricane Matthew website to begin organizing essential pieces of information for the public. So sometimes we call this playing traffic cop, where we direct people to the right resources and the right pieces of information. We are not the ones who actually have the information. We're just directing everyone in the right way. And finally, we recognize this opportunity to try to reframe the blame narrative, not by shifting blame anywhere else, but by better informing the public about specifics of the response so that they know that they're not alone and they're not forgotten. We want to highlight that they have a huge team of people helping and supporting them. So when we first began this project, we asked ourselves who our audience was, and pretty early on, we determined that it would be anyone within our external affairs office, including all regional and field staff. We just kind of assumed that this would be a really helpful tool for messaging. However, once we completed it and began to socialize it, we realized that offices throughout the entire agency could really benefit from it. Each office and division that views it is going to have different takeaways that are applicable to their field. And so we've begun utilizing this as a tool when we do trainings with other offices and partners. It helps provide them with a lot more insight into the overall survivor experience. And when we talk through the opportunities they can identify within each stage for their own teams, it's become an ideal way to legitimize the use for social media and social listening. So I encourage you to spend some time with it as well and think about how it may be applied to your own work. It's also become a useful tool to highlight different anomalies, which helps us better understand how certain catalysts may change the course of conversation. The Hurricane Matthew traditional media story is a good example of this, so better understanding how things might go wrong or how certain things might change the entire flow of information within that experience map can be really helpful to think about ahead of time. And finally, it's allowed us to ultimately become more anticipatory rather than reactionary, and we can use some of those more downtimes in those phases where things are a little bit less crazy to start anticipating other phases coming up. So that's all I had. I want to go ahead and open it up for any questions.
Yeah, Sarah, thank you so much. A very interesting topic that I know a number of us on the presentation today have very much been involved with the social media and emergency management space. And we do have some questions here. Could you please cover social media journey of people who couldn't survive a disaster? Thanks, from Dr. Gupta.
The social media journey of non-survivors, so people outside of the area. I'm just clarifying.
Yeah, why don't we let Dr. Gupta clarify that question and see if we cannot get back to it.
Sure.
Dr. Gupta did say no people die. Yes, dead people do not tweet very well. And so I think we'll wait for a clarification.
Okay.
Do you know where we can access the full VA customer journey map? And I think that's the attachment that you recommended here in the handout, correct?
The attachment is our full journey map. The VA journey map, if you just Google, oh gosh, I think it's called VA Customer Experience Map. You should be able to find it. It's part of a larger document where they document their entire research process, and then it also includes the journey map within it.
Okay, a question here from Mary Jo Flynn. So I like to pick on Mary Jo from our Emerging Technology Caucus. How do we replicate this? What tools are you using, and how do you integrate them into an automated or manual process?
Sure. So as I said, we utilize past social listening reports, which we keep an archive of all of our social listening reports, and it was pretty manual for us because actually during this process we lost access to most of our big fancy tools. So replicating it is a matter of going through old listening reports and mapping out a timeline of when different things are happening and having an understanding of where things are happening within each report, and you kind of visually map that out. As far as automating the process, I haven't really thought about that too much. I think that could be interesting, but it's not something that I've given a lot of thought to. I'd have to think on it a little bit more.
Would you be able to share the slides?
Yeah, sure.
And that's from Nikki Falk, and we'll post that somewhere, Nikki, so you can get those. Amy lost a little bit of audio. Are there any programs that can be used or used by you to monitor social media? And actually, there's 2 or 3 questions about tools. And just for IAEM's sake, and I think, Sarah, this may help you a little bit, I don't think we want to get into the tool talk discussion and be perceived to endorsing products. So I think anybody who wants to discuss tools can either reach out to the Emerging Tech Caucus or Sarah directly, if that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Because there's 2 or 3 questions about paid social listening tools. It's a very crowded space, and we could probably spend a whole hour on the benefits and drawbacks of any given tool.
Mm-hmm.
And will this material be taught to PIOs during various EMI classes? From Mark Barbary.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Will this material be taught to PIOs during the various EMI classes?
Gotcha. So we shared it during a state PIO meeting, I think late last year, and I think that we've kind of tested it out at a couple PIO courses, but I think that it's something that could really be beneficial to become a more regular product within PIO classes. So it's something that our training and building lead can certainly start to work with EMI on, see if it can become more of a regular product in their courses.
Are there people who work in the individual fusion centers, like in Montgomery, Alabama, who work in this process from Amy Stackhouse?
I am not sure. I'm not entirely familiar with what process they're going through and if they might be doing similar types of research. It's possible they are, but I haven't spoken with anyone within those state and local level fusion centers.
A little follow-up from Mary Jo. Do you have any sample of the data that you collect for social listening, and how do you identify the criteria and measures?
Sure, Mary Jo, I can send you an example report. Identifying the criteria is based on our information requirements and requirements set by privacy and legal. So once we establish our information requirements, all of our reports are text-based, and so really just blocks of text and bullet points. And I can share that with you, Mary Jo, if you'd like to see an example of them. And all of our data is pulled by the team of people that I was talking about earlier in the presentation, and then it's reviewed by a team lead who quality control to make sure it really meets our information requirements, falls within our lane, and contains information that is actually actionable or useful to FEMA and to our response, and then it goes forth into a report, and we have an entire verification process that we've established that we follow.
You started a trend now. 2 or 3 other people want your sample data.
Okay.
And there's a couple of good, we can dig them up, but there's a couple of really good websites that have collected tweets of past disasters and have cataloged them nicely for natural language processing. And so there's plenty of these repositories for people to work with.
Sure. And so I should make it known that our data is very limited in terms of language processing because PII and privacy rules on the federal level don't allow us to download any tweets or anything like that onto our own servers. None of our social listening reports will include tweets or anything like that in it. We hyperlink to the original content so that if someone needs to see the full content, they can see it there. But the actual content will not be within the report. And so when we look at the report, it's a lot of manual analysis when you go back to do something like this journey map.
We've got some calls, requests for your contact information, Sarah. So
sure.
If people can reach out to you over Twitter or some other way.
Yeah, do you want me to just verbally brief it out?
Sure.
If you want to reach out to me via Twitter, I'm pretty much always on there. My Twitter handle is SARAMH Smith. And my email is Sarah, SARA .Smith @FEMA.DHS.gov.
Oh, good. Yeah, Chelsea put it out. And I don't know if you know, but Mary Jo and others at the ETC have a standing Twitter chat on Friday. So we'd love to have you join the Twitter chat. It happens every Friday at 12:30.
I try to lurk sometimes when I'm able to.
I think we all like lurkers. So we don't have any additional questions. I'd like to thank you so much. Oh, actually, one last question here. Apologize. Any Fourth Amendment concerns with the data collection?
As I said, we try to be very, very careful with the way that we collect our information and the information that we do collect. So I feel like we cover our bases pretty well. We work very closely with our legal department, so I think that we're pretty good.
Okay, well, I would like to thank everyone for their time today, and IAM for allowing us to have this webinar. Sarah, thank you so much for your time and the overview of the work your team is doing, and please keep up the good work of helping survivors after disasters.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Our next presentation will be on Thursday, August 24th, creating supersonic presentations. It will be a little bit earlier than our normal time at 11:30 Eastern time, so I hope we can get some of the West Coast people up to attend. And thank you so much for your time today, and we appreciate everyone coming to the Thursday learning series.